Welcome to Monday Morning Coffee with Inside the Firm. Each week, our hosts will be interviewing local, regional, and national business leaders to give you an inside peek into how they lead their business to success in the ever-competitive business climate.
Welcome to Monday Morning Coffee with Inside the Firm. Today I have a very special guest. All the way over in Los Angeles, California, Josiah Maddock is an architect specializing in modern, sustainable design. He and his firm, Josiah Maddock Architects, create inspiring spaces through a collaborative, client-focused approach, blending architecture with the development for efficient, high-quality projects. Their hybrid practice offers traditional architectural services and architect as developer solutions, optimizing returns for investors. And whether designing homes, commercial spaces, or public areas, they are committed to excellence and innovation in every single project. Design is their passion, and they aim to transform and elevate each unique project that they undertake. Josiah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Lance.
So excited to have you on because you are, as I said before we started recording, a brother from another mother, another architect as developer. I have one of my best friends and listeners of the show almost every episode. Nate Hacker is him and his business partner. They have, the dream of doing that too. I know I was inspired to do it by Jonathan Segal out there in San Diego.
Same.
Okay,
Yep.
cool. Yeah.
Yep.
But before we get into all that, I'm just so stoked to have you on. Tell us how you got here. Are you from a family of being entrepreneurs? I think when architects take that leap and they start vertically integrating, I'm like, you are an entrepreneur.
Yeah, well, not interesting enough question. I'm not really from my dad's an engineer, but he was a carpenter when I was growing up and a home builder, and he had his own contracting company and would build spec homes oftentimes when I was growing up. So, seeing that as a kid, he was kind of my hero, and that probably planted a seed. So, and I guess he was an entrepreneur in those days. He broke his back doing that a long time ago and went back to school and became a structural engineer. And then my mom is an artist and a free spirit, and if you mix a structural engineer and an artist together, you get an architect. So, coming from that background, it was kind of a natural choice for me. And then I think I really started to develop the entrepreneurial spirit as I progressed in my career, and realized that a lot of the traditional career wasn't really working for me, and that I knew kind of deep down inside there was a better path out there that was going to work for myself and the way I wanted to live my life a lot better.
Before we get into how you transition from just architect to developer, how did you transition out of wherever you were working as just an employee to Josiah Maddock Architecture?
Well, that was kind of a long path, actually. What I did is I was working in San Francisco for many years for big kind of corporate high-rise firms, and the last firm I worked at, it was a great firm, Maddock Architects, and they did great work, and I had really good mentors in that firm. It was just a very good, positive experience. But while I was working in these firms for maybe a decade, I would always do as much side work as I possibly could. And part of that was to try and achieve this goal of starting to buy my own buildings. And so I needed to save up money to do that.
Mhm.
So probably for 5 years, I worked 70-hour weeks, 2 jobs. I would, go to my day job, and then I would come home and I'd work till midnight, and on my side projects, and, go out on Saturday to the site and kind of do that. I don't recommend that anyone do that. It kind of took a toll on my, I got a little burnt out after all that, but it worked. I was able to save enough money to buy my first project, and then did that project. And once that project was done, I was like, this is going to work. I've proven the concept. The goal the whole time was to have my own firm, and as I was doing that project, it became more and more apparent that the architect as developer path was going to work, and that it was for me. And so once I finished that project, I decided to take the leap, and I got a couple clients to start my firm with, and what this is, I won't go too into this, but one of the first clients I had, and one of the reasons I felt comfortable leaving my job at the time was just a laughably bad fit as a client. Just the absolute horror story. Everything that could have gone wrong went wrong, and it was such a bad experience that it lit a real, they owed me tons of money, and it just all this stuff, and it was such a bad experience that it really lit a fire under my butt to be like, okay, you don't need to be taking clients on anymore. Like this, you don't want to be at the mercy of people who are amateurs in the building world, who don't want to pay their bills, who don't understand how anything works,
Hmm.
and you can bypass all that. And so after that experience, I was like, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to just develop my own projects. And it really lit a fire under me and inspired me to make the move. And so now I'm still doing a couple client facing projects, but I'm not taking on any new clients, and all my new work is coming. I'm buying myself.
That's beautiful. I love that you're able to make the full transition. We hadn't been able to make the full transition. I think what we did is we ended up blossoming our sister firm, which is a general contracting firm. And we're quite
Mm,
happy with that. That's where we actually then become very picky about who we build for. But I completely commend you, Josiah, for being able to take that full leap, just like Jonathan Segal did. I mean, that's his one of his big pitches is he's like, I am done with clients. I am the client. I know what's best. There's a very egocentric part of it, but like I've seen the work. It's beautiful. In my opinion, he's like the modern day Frank Lloyd Wright in terms of just owning the whole process because, Frank did that with the Tellius West and East and all that good stuff.
yeah.
How does how did he intersect with you? I mean, did you hear about him first before you started taking this leap?
So yeah, I did. So during that whole process, the whole run up to me taking the leap and really going all in, I did a ton of education, a lot of real estate investment education, and I really recommend people go into that world and do a lot of networking there and really figure out that kind of real estate investment development, networking and education, and also the first bit of it that I did, as an architect, I came across Jonathan Segal's work and took his course,
Hmm.
and just found that to be very inspirational, and watching what he talked about and his business model. And I was like, that it just a light bulb went off. I was like, that solves all the problems that I'm finding in architecture of low pay, lack of creative control, just difficulty in finding clients, the inefficiency in working as a client-facing firm, and it solves all those problems. And I would say my just to talk about inefficiency real quick, I would say it takes me about half the time to do a project now in architectural hours and fees as it does if I'm doing it client-facing.
I'm sure it does. Yeah. For us, it streamlined it too, because usually entitlements, like I'm sitting in the building we designed, built, and developed for ourselves, and which is now our office. And then behind me, I live in one of the condos. It's truly the work build,
Yeah,
like Segal does too.
yeah,
Uh, it took half the time to get through the entitlements.
yeah,
We just controlled the whole situation. It was much better in that kind of a way. Maybe we can go backwards a little bit. Tell us about your
yeah.
first project. What was your first project that you
So,
did?
yeah, my first project was it was an adaptive reuse project. I bought an old church in Berkeley and turned it into luxury co-housing, basically. So it took, it was from an architectural perspective, it was adaptive reuse. From a development and real estate perspective, it's kind of similar to what you're doing, where it was house hacking, where my office was there.
Hmm.
We had, it was kind of a co-housing environment with a big shared main space, and then all these kind of suites off of that. And so we would always have friends living with us that would help, because I was financially at the time, I had no money, and so I was stretched to kind of my limit. I turned to my girlfriend at the time, now fiance, and when I bought it, and I was like, well, I'm all in on this. This is either I'm at the end I'll be bankrupt, or we'll have this beautiful mansion in Berkeley, and it was kind of a an all in scenario. And so in order to help pay for that project and to pay the mortgage and everything, we would, we'd always have friends living with us, which turned into this
Mm,
really beautiful thing. It was this wonderful community environment. And, the church is huge. It's 4 stories, 4,000 square feet, 7 bedrooms. And in the Bay Area, that's a massive, massive house. And so that project worked out great. I made more money in equity on that project than I did in the entirety of the rest of my career combined. And that kind of house hacking principle, a lot of people ask me, like, how do I get started in this? Like, what do I do? It's like, do that. Buy a duplex, buy a 4 unit building, buy a warehouse, put your house in half of the warehouse, put your office in the other half, get diverse income streams,
mhm,
do whatever it takes to escape that wage slavery kind of grind that so many people in big cities and architecture firms are in, where they're just barely making it, can't afford to buy a house, and in the Bay Area, I would say 20% of architects can afford to buy their own house,
mhm.
30%. I don't know exactly what the number is, but it's shockingly low. And so that project turned out really great. And now I've got it rented out. It was a buy and hold. I got it rented out as luxury co-housing, and it, gives me, a great profit every month, while I'm sleeping. It pays me whether or not I'm working. So that kind of having assets working in the background for you is a freedom that development gives that architecture doesn't really give, unless you own your own office, or what you're doing, right? Like, your office is there as an asset, building
Mhm.
you equity every day, and saving you money on rent, and all the rent that you put into it is going into a bank account, so it's just, that got me started, proved the concept to me. Now I've got this beautiful church in Berkeley.
Yeah. So now you're onto your second project, right? Like, or you already
I,
completed it?
Yeah, I've completed that project. I've bought 3 other projects down here in LA this year. So this year is January. I looked at myself and I said, "You're doing it this year, Josiah. You're only buying all your new projects." And so I bought 3 projects down here so far. Those are mostly done. I'm going to sell them all. And I'm putting one on the market today. Actually, what is today? Is it Thursday? No, tomorrow. Sorry, the photographer is coming today.
Yeah.
And then the other 2 in about a month, I'll put them on the market. And so, with interest rates being so high right now, I'm mostly looking at shorter term, 6 to 9 month projects, trying to keep that, cash load down, and it's selling them instead of holding them.
What kind of a did the first project that you was a buy and hold, and now
Yeah,
you're renting it out and you're getting cash flow going and stuff like that.
yeah.
Is that still playing into your acquisitions? Are you using that as leverage to acquire the other ones, or are you able to actually separate now and kind of multiply?
I've separated and multiplied now. All the money that I've got, all the debt I've got on the church is at 275 or something
Yeah.
ridiculous low amount. So I'm just leaving the equity in that now, and I've got enough of a war chest built up where and investors, obviously. Most of the money I put into projects comes from investors, and I pay them really good money, and they trust me because I've got a track record built up of 20 years of architecture, and that was the investor part of it was the big scary thing for me. That's something as architects that we know nothing about. I would say the 2 skill sets that I really were kind of scary for me was well, the analysis part of it wasn't scary. That was easy. I find it enjoyable, analysis and acquisitions. But investment and raising money was scary for me. But now we've got more money raised than we can put to work right
Oh my
now. We've
gosh.
got probably $1 million waiting in the wings, waiting to be put to work. And I'm kind of the bottleneck right now, where I've got to scale up my business so we can get all this money to work. And that's enough money to buy another 5 projects probably.
Yeah.
Um, when you couple that, your investment, your investor part of the project is maybe only 20%. I don't know how you put your deals together, but for my deals, it's, 20% cash, 80% debt typically. And
Yeah.
most of that 20% cash comes from investors. I only put 20 or 30 grand of my own money into each project, something like that.
Yeah, it's pretty much it's I would say that's in Colorado anyway. That's sort of the lower end where you're at, upwards of maybe 35%. But that swing in there, and if you can manage it, I agree. Tell us about your team. So, maybe starting with the acquisition part of it and the analysis. Are you a realtor yourself? I know some people go all as far as like they even get the license. I guessed it on a podcast yesterday, and I told him about our model, which is vertically integrated. And he goes, man, one more, and you've got the whole thing covered. I'm right. He's like if you become a realtor,
Yeah.
maybe you could start there and tell us like how does the whole team work for you?
So, good question. Yeah, no, I'm not trying to take on all the developer and architect is enough hats for me, and so I'm kind of focused on those two. So, right now I'm doing a lot of the analysis and finding a lot of the projects myself. But I've got teams of real estate agents and wholesalers and real estate people out there kind of feeding me leads, basically. And I don't mind paying them the $20,000 or whatever it is finder's fee to give me a good project, because that kind of takes that chunk of work out of my court. And so I've got, I network with a big group of people in the real estate and development worlds, and I've got a lot of people want to partner up and things like that. So opportunities are kind of being flowing to me. So I'll analyze them myself in house, and I need to hire someone on the development side to take that chunk of work off my plate. And then if the deal is good, I'll go shop it around to investors, purchase it, and then it turns into architecture, and then I'll hire my architecture firm to do the work. And then on the architecture side, I've got 3 employees that are, drafter, architect type people. I shouldn't say drafters; they're all modelers. And then one is more of kind of construction management side. So that's the construction management is a big chunk of work, obviously, when you're doing these projects. And So that's kind of, if I was going to scale up to 10 people, it would probably be two on the development side, finding, analyzing deals, four architecture in-house and or 5 architecture in-house, and then 3 kind of construction management people doing the day-to-day um, management of the projects.
So, do you have we have ours separated out by different LLCs and companies, and that's one of the things you learn from that taking that course with Jonathan.
Yeah.
Same thing for you? Are you guys separating out where there's a contracting
Yeah,
side?
absolutely. Yeah, so I've got a C corp for Josiah Maddock Architects. I've got an LLC that is my umbrella LLC for the development work, and then each project we put into a separate LLC, and that which then is dissolved once that project sells. So that's kind of the format for, and so then I keep the architecture side of the business and the development side of the business, those, 2 separate companies, and I just hire myself as the architect basically. But it takes a ton of people often ask me is, they're like, oh, well, that seems very risky, developing your own projects. But for me, and this is kind of an aside, I just thought of it, but for me, it actually de-risks
Mhm.
the process very massively because I'm in control of the timeline of the project. I can buy a new project anytime I want. It takes me less time to go out and buy a project than it does to land a new client, and do all the proposals and get them on board and sign the contract and everything. It probably takes me half the time to go out and find a project and purchase it for myself. And I control when that happens. With the client, you never know when they're going to come in.
Yeah.
You never know when they're going to stop the project. Never know when they don't want to pay their bills. You never know when there's so much risk in the traditional process of architecture. I mean, how much of got in bills that haven't been paid over your career by clients. I've worked at firms before where it's been $500,000, $1 million, where these big developers are like, well, the project doesn't work anymore. I'm not paying anyone who's on the project, and we're stopping it. And so for me, being in control of both parts of that, I always pay myself.
Hmm.
If I stop the project, I'm still going to pay my architecture firm, but I've got the decision making ability in house to not need to stop the project, and to kind of know what it's going to take to get it built. So for me, it de-risks the process pretty massively.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, there's always the ambulance chasers waiting in lieu, to come
Yeah.
in there and stuff like that. But you're right from in the way you're painting the picture in terms of less risk, 100%. What about how about the general contracting side of things? I mean, are you a general contractor then, or do you hire that out? Is a CM?
So I hired that out, but I've got do my own construction management, in house. As you would for it's kind of a step beyond what you would typically do as a architecture firm, but I hire out the general contracting, and I try and find people that I want to work with on multiple times. Right now, a contractor I'm working with, we're going to partner up on a deal down here, and then that can be a really good partnership too. I try and partner up with people as much as I can. Also, just it allows you to spread out the risk and take on more projects, and it just kind of keeps the energy high, and allows you to, two minds are better than one oftentimes.
Yeah, it's like it's I think arguably more collaborative, right? Like
Yeah.
there's more teamwork involved with it rather than us being these separate entities and stuff. We're sort of both having skin in the game at that point. So we're both moving towards a common goal in that kind of a way. I agree. I mean, I'm considering doing another partnership outside of F9 and what we do. Hopefully going to meet with one of my builder buddies, who's also a developer, built my house, and I've just kept in touch with him for a while. Same kind of vision, sort of thing, of what we're trying to do. What How do you see this business model? Because I think it's still the minority, right? Clearly, of like architects and what we're doing. So how do you see this business model like evolving in the future? And then for other people who are listening to this show, like what advice would you give them if they are considering making that shift?
How do I see it evolving in the future? For me personally, I just want to grow into bigger projects. I'm doing most of my projects. I'm buying around $1 million right now, and within a year, I'd like to be doing ground up construction. Very high end, $5 million ish kind of custom homes. Man, that might be 2 years out, but and potentially do some multifamily stuff. And boutique resorts, that's actually a big area of interest
Mm,
for me. I'm working on one right now with a couple partners. We haven't we're not we're still in the acquisitions phase, but we've got investors, and we're looking for the right property. And so for me, it's just to start doing bigger and bigger projects and more high design projects, and just kind of work into doing exactly the projects I want to do, where I want to do them. So, for me, that's what it looks like. It's just a matter of scaling, and really kind of honing in on exactly the quantity and quality of projects I want to do. For the architecture field as a whole, this is a it's just such a good solution to what I've heard architects complain about for 20 years in the field. When you're
yeah.
working in an office, all the complaints that people have with client facing projects, with low pay, with lack of creative control, and this solves it. So I would really like to see like the AIA start to try and be proactive, because I haven't seen them do anything about this
They're
really.
silent.
That doesn't
Yeah.
mean they're not. I just haven't seen it. But I'd like them to start standing up for the architecture field and being like, hey, this solves some problems with the architecture field, and I'd like to see more architects like you're doing such a good service to the architecture field by talking about this and by kind of leading the way. And so I'd just like to see more conversation about it. And I'd like architects to know that this is very doable. Like you can find the investors, you can, just start doing it on the side. Do your first project as your own house,
Yeah.
buy a house, build a house on the back of the lot, build an ADU, rent it out, buy a 4 unit building, live in 1 unit, rent out the other three. That'll get you started, that'll build up your equity, that'll get some cash flow going. And then you can leverage that project for the next project, and then once you start getting some assets, money just becomes a lot easier, you just have banks of equity that you can tap into, and you start building up networks of people that want to loan you money. And it's just a very doable thing for architects to do. Like we have 90% of the knowledge base to do this already. You can go out and learn the analysis and fundraising side of it pretty quickly. And it's just a small shift in thinking, and kind of the just take the risk. It's super, super worth it.
Yeah. You give me an idea to pitch a panel to the AIA at this point now. I mean, where
I
like,
love
what
that
if it
idea.
were, yeah, what if it's like people like me and you and Jonathan up there, like we could find 5 or 6 of us for sure and do a
Absolutely.
nice big fat panel.
Yeah.
That would go a long ways, right? But we got to pitch it. So
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe behind the scenes we could work on something like that.
I
You
love that idea.
you mentioned, but it's not, the AIA is not going to come to us. We got to go to them.
Hmm. I hear
So
you. Yeah.
you mentioned just there at the end of your last statements that learning the analysis and the fundraising and financing. Maybe if you could touch on that before my last 2 questions here, that would be great. Like somebody who's new in listing, are you just going out and talking to realtors? Are you just starting to talk with other developers that you've worked with in the past at other firms and talk and just say, hey, I'm looking at doing some stuff. How do I raise money? Is it that
Yeah.
simple?
Yeah, super good question. And practically speaking, I just did education. I put money into education of myself to round out my skill set. So I took development courses. I took real estate investment courses. I got mentors. I networked in the real estate investment world and the development world, and just started talking to people. And I probably did about a year of networking before I like really pulled the trigger, and just started like immersing myself in that world and talking to everyone and being like, hey, I'm an architect, I want to get into development, and people are really friendly and really helpful when they're sharing their passion, and so I would go do these real estate investment courses on the weekends, which were incredibly helpful. And I would go do development courses, and just go to all of these kind of community meetings and gatherings and networking events. And through that, I learned how to do that. And that was the analysis side of things. And they'll kind of teach you how to do the fundraising side of things too. But the fundraising side of things is just talking to everyone
Hmm.
about it, letting them know what you're doing, letting them know, that you now have built up the education to do this. And I've got a emailing list that I keep in social media, and just like talking to people about it, and then kind of letting the for me, it's kind of attraction. I'm like, hey, here's what I'm up to, and then people will reach out. Every time I do a social media post, I'll get like three or four new investors out of that. They're like, whoa, this is cool. Yeah, and it helps that I'm paying them 15%, right?
Hmm.
Like that's great return. And so I think the education part of it is critical. Invest in yourself. Over the year before I fully pulled the trigger on this, I probably spent not a huge amount of money, but 10 grand or something on like that, in
Hmm.
education, and it is worth every penny.
Yeah. Uh, just I asked people 2 questions right before we're coming up on the half hour here. First one is going back in time, and if you could give yourself one piece of advice before you started this current endeavor that you're on as architect and developer, what would that advice be?
Oh man, that's such a good question. I think do it sooner. It would have been my advice to myself. Like, don't, I was waiting kind of for everything to be just right and for
Yeah.
me to have enough money saved and, all this stuff. And I do it sooner. It doesn't take a huge war chest to do this. Like, you can just start and get investors and, just do it sooner, especially if you have a day job. There's no risk in like really aggressively pushing this on the side. And, so, for me, don't I, if I was talking to my younger self, is don't be scared about these things you don't know. Just aggressively pursue it. Get the education, because that helps me be confident about it a lot. And do the networking and do the footwork that prepares you, but then just pull the trigger and start doing these projects. Get a partner, get a couple investors, do a project, you know worst case scenario, you lose a little bit of money and have gain a ton of knowledge, but probably you're gonna, you're an architect, you can do this, so that would have been my advice to my younger self, is get started sooner and don't wait for everything to be just lined up just right.
Amen. There's no perfect timing ever. The growth is painful every time.
Yeah.
It's like, you're biting off more than you can chew, and you just hopefully can hold the sandwich or the metaphorical burger in your mouth. This is what I tell anybody who's a higher up at any of my firms. I'm like, I'm sorry we're biting off more than you can chew, but this is how it works. And I hear it over and over and over again from people like you, Josiah. Josiah, you've been such a brilliant guest. I'm so glad we were able to find each other on LinkedIn. I'm headed out to California at the end of October. Maybe somehow we could link up,
Yeah, let's meet
have
up, that'd be
coffee.
great.
That'd be cool. If people want to find you and follow you also and learn about all you're doing, where's the best place for them to find you?
Josiah Maddock on Instagram, LinkedIn, and josiahmaddock.com. Real simple.
Easy,
And
easy peasy.
I welcome any channel.
Yeah, and check out his LinkedIn. You got to check out his LinkedIn. The posts are great. Like you said, I mean, they're so good on LinkedIn that then people just come out of the woodwork and they're like, how do we get involved with this? So beautiful. Well, thanks again for being on the
Thanks.
show, Josiah. We appreciate your
Such a
time.
pleasure, Lance. I really appreciate you and all the great work you're doing. This is wonderful for architecture.
Thanks, bud.